Have you ever visited a state and thought, wow, I could totally live here forever? Yeah, well, the people that actually live in these states would like to have a word. Today we're looking at the top 10 states that are great to visit but terrible to live. The places where tourists flood in, take millions of selfies, and leave behind traffic jams, housing crises, and locals wondering why their rents cost more than a year's supply of beachfront margaritas. From Florida's theme park chaos to Hawaii's paradise problems, let's see which states are surviving on tourism and suffering because of it. Let's take a look. Number 10, South Carolina. South Carolina offers classic southern charm, beaches, plantation tours, and historic towns. It draws legions of vacationers looking for sun, history, and coastal retreats, but locals often complain about the hidden costs. And they have a lot of them, both hidden costs and complaints. For visitors, it's picturesque streets cloaked in Spanish moss, coastal dunes, resort life, marshlands. For residents, coastal towns face real estate pressures, second homes, vacation rentals, infrastructure demands like sewer, road, and stormwater, and seasonal economic swings. The tension between preserving character and accommodating growth is a constant for many of the small coastal towns. The less glamorous side involves balancing tourism with residents' needs. Emergency services get stretched on high traffic weekends. Local governments sometimes defer investments in tourist zones, while inland communities languish. When the sun sets, the economic rhythm tied to tourism can leave many residents wondering, do we live here or just host here? I grew up in a coastal tourist town, not too far down the coast from Venice and Santa Monica, California. We didn't get it as bad as they did, but on 4th of July weekends, all through the summer, and because of the good weather, most of the spring. And it was brutal, especially if you're a local. My personal opinion, the biggest problem besides the traffic is drunk non-locals that think they own the place. Now in South Carolina, the most popular places for tourists and the residents that suffer the most will be in Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head, and a lot of the coastal regions. The low country pretty much. Now, even though South Carolina doesn't see that many people, about 20 million a year, when surveyed, 61% of the residents said they would like to see less tourists. Number 9, Louisiana. Louisiana leans heavily on cultural tourism, jazz festivals, historic French Quarter tours, swamp tours, Mardi Gras. For visitors, the state offers vibrant music, food, architecture, and a unique cultural synthesis. For many locals, though, the burden of supporting the tourists' veneer is deep. I've been to a lot of different parties in my life, gone to Vegas many times, all kinds of beach festivals, cruise ships. There is nothing more, it's wild. The wildest parties I've ever been to are in Mardi Gras, to the point where you feel like your life's in danger at some point. When you're in your 20s and you think you're going to live forever, that's one thing. But when you start getting in 40, going, if someone hits me over the head here, I may never recover. But the concentration of tourism in cities like New Orleans means heavy foot traffic, strained public safety systems, inflated retail rents, and a kind of cost of doing culture that the city must underwrite. Neighborhoods are often put under a lot of strain, either because of over-touristed or they're just ignored. Local infrastructure, from transit to sanitation, feels stretched during festival season. In many cases, the revenue from tourism doesn't reliably trickle down into education, housing, or systemic equity. Instead, it props up a hospitality bubble. When the music fades and the storms hit, the local economy, which has been structured around tours and events, can fall onto some really hard times. And for a lot of states this year, it's been pretty rough. Tourism is way down. They're not on this list, but Las Vegas, oddly enough, I thought they'd be on this list for sure. They're suffering right now. But in Louisiana, locals often find themselves serving as caretakers of a tourist brand rather than the beneficiaries of it. 65% of the population claim they could go for fewer tourists. Louisiana sees about 42.6 million visitors every year. The most frequent in places, obviously, New Orleans, bayous, and cultural tourism like festivals. Number 8, Alaska. Alaska is often romanticized as the last frontier. That romance attracts tourists, but also intensifies the strain on communities that are remote and lightly populated. Now, they feel it hard. They hardly get any tourists compared to other states because they're so remote, but they just have such a small population. it wears on these people. Visitors get glaciers, whales, rugged terrain, fishing lodges, wilderness. Residents bear the cost. In remote towns, every visitor arrival requires infrastructure that must be overbuilt for peak loads but sits underused off-season. Ports, airports, ferries, waste systems, all must be sized for the occasional bursts. Additionally, community identity can feel under siege when tourism is like the only way the town is making money, and for a lot of these towns, that's exactly what's going on. It kind of changes the pace, the culture, and the character of the town because they're shifting towards visitor expectations. I've talked to many locals when I've been on cruises to Alaska. I've been on like 6 cruises to Alaska, and I always like to talk to the locals when I can. And because of what I do for a living, this channel, I, ask them about things. What's it like in the off season here and how do you survive? One thing is most of the residents will leave because they're only seasonal workers, so they're really not residents. And the ones that are left behind, it's practically a ghost town. Skagway is a perfect example. I talked to an older gentleman right after the pandemic, and he was happy to see everyone back. He lived there his entire life. I think if I remember correctly, he said he moved there around 2nd or 3rd grade. His father worked for the railroad. When he was a freshman in high school, they literally came into the classroom and said, "Does anyone want to quit school and start working for the railroad?" He raised his hand and off he went. But he's retired railroad, so he could survive there. And he's got a nice pension and all that. But he said a lot of the places suffer. During the pandemic, the businesses, the local restaurants, they went on a cycle where one would stay open one week, another one would be open the next week, so they could all be making some money. So everyone voluntarily closed down, and all the locals, especially the retirees that had incomes coming in, would go and, eat at the restaurants just to kind of keep the town alive. In recent years, Alaska has tried to limit the amount of cruise ships that would come into the ports because they just wear on the towns too much. Now, they're in a tough spot because that's, like I said, how a lot of these towns survive is the cruise ships. Alaska only sees about 2.6 million visitors every year, and they're all coming for summer months for cruise ships and national parks and wilderness tours. That's not a theme park, so they get a couple thousand with each cruise ship, and most of the towns only see, a handful of cruise ships every single week. And peak season is really only about 3 or 4 months. 66% of the population of Alaska would like to see fewer visitors. Number 7, California. Now, this is the one I grew up in, and I grew up in one of the small coastal towns, like I said earlier, and tourism does start to wear on you, especially when you consider we weren't too far away from Hollywood, Santa Monica, about an hour's ride from Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountains right up the road. I've seen my share of tourists. You may argue California is too big to be terrible to live in. But the concentration of tourism in zones like Yosemite, Big Sur, national parks, and coastal towns means that large swaths of the state see all the downsides of tourism without evenly distributed benefits. Visitors see the beautiful coastlines, national park wonders, wine country, Hollywood, deserts, redwoods. Locals see traffic nightmares in places that shouldn't be getting traffic, like Big Sur and the different coastal towns. You got overwhelmed parking, rising housing costs in resort towns, and the tension between preserving wild zones and accommodating visitors. The state always likes to point out that we earn billions every single year in tourism in California, which is great for local economies, but it doesn't really take into consideration what it's doing to the state. Trail erosions, pollution, wildlife risk, water stress, it's all a big package that gets put to the test during tourist seasons. And for California, that's most of the year. One of the biggest problems California has these days, especially in the coastal towns and the nicer cities, is the second home people and vacation rental industry. Besides all the other reasons that the real estate is getting jacked up in California, this is just another nail in California's real estate coffin. If you ever want to see a town that's been just, I don't want to say destroyed, but kind of messed up, is Anaheim, California, where you'll find Disneyland and all the other touristy things and businesses that go along with Disneyland. They call it the Disneyfication of Anaheim. You don't just have Disneyland. You have all these other, like those themed restaurants up and down the street, and it's like Vegas without the gambling some places. California sees about 250 million domestic and international visitors annually. 71% of the people questioned in California said that they would like to see fewer tourists. Number 6, Washington. Washington is a striking example. Naturalism, cities, islands, forests. Seattle is a global magnet. The Olympic Peninsula and Cascade Range draw legions of nature seekers, but living long-term under that shadow reveals friction, and a lot of it. For visitors, ferry rides, fjords, temperate rainforests, mountain wilderness, urban culture. For residents, high housing costs in the metro areas, inflated real estate and getaway communities, and infrastructure that is often built to meet tourist needs more than residential use. The state's West Coast climate further presses on transportation and storm-resilient infrastructure. The rural towns near park entrances often struggle. They feel pulled between preserving what drew the visitors, the scenery and the quiet, and accommodating the facilities that those visitors demand. Visitor spikes strain fiber and cellular networks, roads, and emergency response capacities. Some locals, especially in the Seattle metro area, say that there's certain parts of the city they don't even go to because there's too many tourists. That's one of the biggest problems. Now, Seattle is a nightmare with tourism because they have the same cruise ship thing. They have cruise ports right there in Seattle. Those tourists come in a day before, stay a day after. So you just have this influx, this conveyor belt of people getting on cruise ships. That entire waterfront area is a nightmare during cruise season. Been there many times. All the way up to Pike Place, and then you get to the Space Needle, and that's not as bad, but it can get pretty crowded. Now, the places you're going to see the most tourists is Seattle, Puget Sound, Olympic Peninsula, and the Cascade Range. They see about 25.9 million visitors every year, and also, like California, 71% of the population say they'd like to see fewer visitors. Number 5, Arizona. Arizona is notable for its landscapes. You got the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, Sedona, the desert flora. That's what draws people. But the same harsh environment makes sustaining local communities harder under mass visitation. For tourists, you got dramatic vistas, hiking, sun-soaked panoramas, desert enchantment. For residents, water scarcity, heat stress, infrastructure strain in towns bordering national parks, and skyrocketing property values. In the region near tourist traps, local housing often shifts to short-term rentals, squeezing out year-round residents. Another issue is wear and maintenance. When trails, roads, viewing platforms, and access roads must handle a flood of visitors daily, local governments bear maintenance costs that often exceed the modest local tax base. The lure of profits from lodging and tourism businesses may distort the local priorities, away from durable community foundations. Yeah, it's a big problem, especially when you go to the vacation rental thing. You know, you got all these people doing Airbnb and Vrbo. That just takes homes out of the local marketplace for residents. Arizona sees about 45 million visitors every single year, and about 71% of them wish they would stop, or at least some of them. Number 4, Colorado. Colorado has become a victim of its own natural beauty. Its mountains, ski resorts, trails, and national parks draw millions of visitors every single season. That influx helps local economies, but it also erodes them in subtle, accumulating ways. From the lens of the visitor, Colorado delivers crisp air, towering peaks, pristine trails, and ski lifts. Locals, however, wrestle with housing crisis and mountain towns, a two-tier workforce. You got tourism versus essential workers, and strained infrastructure, your roads, your transit, your cell coverage. The more tourism creates opportunity, the more it intensifies inequality. Service workers can't afford to live where they work. Moreover, the environment is under pressure. Overused trails, demand for water, forest fire risk, and parking congestion all rise with foot traffic. Balancing accessibility with preservation becomes a constant tension. The weight of visitor expectations can sometimes crowd out the voices of long-term residents in planning decisions. Now, all the tourism is going to happen on the western side where the Rockies are of Colorado. Not much goes on the eastern side. It's kind of flat and nothing there. 72% of Colorado's population would like to see fewer tourists. Colorado sees about 95.4 million visitors per year. Number 3, Tennessee. Tennessee is a sort of interior tourism juggernaut. The Great Smoky Mountains, Dollywood, musical tourism in Nashville and in Memphis all funnel consistent crowds. This volume is both a boon and a curse. Visitors often see polished cabins, friendly small towns, live music festivals, and scenic roads. Residents see the very different underside: spikes in traffic on rural roads not built for high volume, hospitality districts that dominate property use, and service jobs that don't pay enough to keep people in place. When your economy is so lopsided towards hospitality, people who grew up in the state sometimes feel pushed out or forced to migrate to urban cores. Local governments in many counties must maintain roads, parking lots, sewer capacity, emergency services. These all have to scale for tourist surges, but their tax base will remain weak, so the cost of supporting tourism often falls on the local residents. The seasonal rhythm also means boom and busts. Towns swell with visitors, then shrink again, leaving infrastructure underused much of the year. Tennessee sees about 147 million visitors every single year, bringing in about $31 billion in direct visitor spending. But 73% of the population would like to see fewer visitors. Number 2, Hawaii. Now this one kind of surprised me, but I'll get into that later. Hawaii exists in a kind of suspended contradiction. The islands live by the visitor trade, and yet the same trade threatens to hollow them out. Visitors come for the myth: pristine beaches, aloha spirit, volcanic landscapes. You know, the whole Hawaii thing. Many leave with postcards and sunburns. Some leave with surprise at how much the state struggles under its own popularity. For locals, the visitor-driven model means exorbitant housing prices, saturated infrastructure, and resources that are terribly strained: water, waste, transportation. As the Tourism Authority reports, congestion and traffic complaints are persistent, even among visitors themselves, not just the locals. Many residents find it difficult to maintain a normal standard of living when so much of the economy and public attention is orientated towards visitor satisfaction. Further, the natural environment is fragile, and this is the biggest draw to Hawaii, is the natural environment. So that keeps the people coming, but it's also destroying the natural environment and their culture. The tension is frequent. Is the state preserving the islands for their people or preserving them as a showroom for visitors? The local cost of that tension is high. Hawaii is in a rough spot. That's how they make their money, but at the same time, it's ruining their lifestyle. Their housing prices are ridiculous for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is the vacation rentals, second homes, and of course there's the overall, it's far away from the mainland. Yeah, that is a tough one though. Anyway, they only see about 10 million visitors, a little over, which isn't a lot, but it's also a very small place. 77% of their population say they'd like to see a lot less tourists. All right, before we get to number 1, if you're thinking about moving to any one of these touristy states, there's a link for a website called Home and Money in the description area below. They can get you in touch with a real estate agent anywhere in the country. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Florida. Florida is, a classic paradox. Paradise for vacationers, a pressure cooker for residents. Tourists flood the theme parks of Orlando, the beaches of Miami, the Keys, and the countless resort towns. The state government leans hard on tourism revenues, sometimes at the expense of infrastructure, environmental health, and local livability. For visitors, Florida offers sun-orbiting roller coasters, warm waves, and cheap flights. For locals, that same influx means congested roads, ballooning property taxes, and a housing market increasingly skewed towards short-term rentals instead of long-term stability. The pressure to cater to tourist dollars means the local governments sometimes prioritize aesthetic facades or vacation-friendly zones over deep investment in schools, transit, or public services. The strain deepens when seasonality collides with climate risk. Hurricanes, sea level rise, water quality issues, and rising insurance costs compound that burden. The tourism windfall can disappear with the next storm. For someone living in Florida full-time, too many seasons of this can be a deal breaker and they head back to like South Carolina or Georgia. Yeah, that's another one that's in a rough spot. Tourism is almost everything to Florida in a way. I don't think they're making any money off Florida man memes. Florida sees about 144 million visitors every single year, and about 78% of the population would like to see a lot less than that. All right, that's today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.